welcome once again. I'm Imran Garta and you're in the stream. Today we look at what lies ahead for the Muslim holy city of Mecca as it undergoes expansion and modernization. Now looking out for all your feedback is Malika Bilal. Joining her on the couch is Arsalan Iftikhar, an international human rights lawyer and the author of Islamic Pacifism, Global Muslims in the Post-Osama Era. It's quite a provocative title. Islam, pacifism and Osama all in the same title. Tell us what the book's about.
It was meant to be provocative, and it's gotten a lot of responses from all around the world. Islamic pacifism is meant to set forth a socio-political ethos of nonviolence for young Muslim girls and boys around the world. Essentially, most Muslims around the world feel as though the global microphone of Muslims has been yanked by people like Osama bin Laden and other extremists since 9/11, and because of that, many Americans and many Westerners have negative views towards Islam and Muslims. And so this book highlights the contributions and the condemnations that we've done and how to move forward in this post-Osama era now.
Who's the core audience?
The core audience is everyone, really. It's for non-Muslims and Muslims alike. It's for young Muslim girls and boys to let them know they can practice their religion in peace. It's for non-Muslims in that we Muslims are here to live in peace with everyone else. It really is a message for all of humanity.
Okay, Arsalan, look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you.
And particularly as you chime in on our topic regarding Saudi Arabia. Well, as always, you can tell us what stories matter to you. You can follow us on Twitter and send a tweet with a hashtag AJStream. Of course, we could feature your suggestion in a future episode.
Many of you have been following the planned Israeli-Palestinian prisoner swap that is expected to take place within days, and we've been following your conversation. As the families of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners and Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit prepare for their relatives' return, both activists and officials have turned to the web to voice their thoughts on the swap. Twitter user Eben Ezra writes, "I think the prisoner Shalit deal will empower extremists on both sides." But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hailed the deal, calling it a tough decision on his official Twitter account. U.S. Secretary of State called me and congratulated me on the release of Shalit. She said that such a decision requires guts and leadership. Now, across the aisle, Twitter user Nabila Zahir questioned the ratio of detainees to be swapped. What does this mean about the value of Palestinian life? Nabila is referring to the 1,027 Palestinian prisoners in Israel who are set to be freed in exchange for Shalit, who was captured by Hamas in 2006. Ikra Azhar poses an answer. Not only did that remind me of the value of black slaves in U.S. history, but I thought, no wonder Israelis are so united. They don't let a single man out of their sight. Well, despite the swap, activists say they are still committed to raising awareness about the conditions facing Palestinian prisoners who remain in Israeli jails. Lina Al-Safin tweets, "Today is the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, and Palestinian tweets are spamming the hashtag to draw attention to the plight of Palestinian prisoners. Well, we want your thoughts on this subject. Tweet us by completing the hashtag 1for1000 memes, and we might include your response in an upcoming show."
Hi, I'm Alexis Ohanian, founder of breadpig.com, and I am in the stream.
Now, with the annual pilgrimage of Hajj only weeks away, millions of Muslims have begun converging on Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Considered the holiest city in Islam, it houses the Grand Mosque and Kaaba, the black stone cube that Muslims face when they pray. In an attempt to meet the growing number of pilgrims and their needs, the Saudi monarchy has continued to expand the area around the Grand Mosque. Have a look at this picture here. It's the latest project is expected to be the kingdom's largest undertaking, which would allow an additional 1.2 million Muslim pilgrims into the Grand Mosque. This picture actually taken by our very own Fadi Benni, who was with me covering the Hajj just last year. Fantastic, as you can see. Here's the Haram, or the Grand Mosque in the middle, the clock tower and the shopping malls and the hotels on the one side, and room for the expansion on the other. This taken via a helicopter trip during the Hajj. However, in doing so, they've destroyed numerous religious and historical sites. Critics accuse the government of demolishing landmarks in accordance with Wahabism. Now, that's the country's official interpretation of Islam, which believes that shrines encourage idolatry. Others are critical of the commercialization that the expansion has brought. Take a look at this ad for a residence building in Mecca. This is for the Zamzam Towers in Mecca. Have a look.
أتود أن تكون بهذا المقام من البيت الحرام عاماً بعد عام.
Own your home at Zamzam Tower, the most exclusive real estate development in the world. Buy your property lease to a luxurious apartment in direct view of the Holy Mosque in Mecca. For a personal consultation, contact Alpha One Estates now.
Looks great if you can afford it. Well, joining us now via Skype from Jeddah is Dr. Sami Angawi, an architect and founder of the Hajj Research Center. And with us on the phone from London is Dr. Irfan Al-Alawi, the Executive Director of the Islamic Heritage Research Foundation. Welcome to the stream, gentlemen. Dr. Angawi, we know that Saudi Arabia needs to expand the holy sites, particularly since there's a growing demand for pilgrims every year for Hajj and for Umrah, which occurs throughout the year. But has that expansion come at a price?
Well, when we talk about expansion, we have to differentiate between expansion for the prayers and expansion to accommodate the people need to be in the mosque praying, and the other expansion, which is to accommodate pilgrims. And I think from the beginning of time, there was more and more expansion in the mosque. But the other one, which you have commercial for, and the commercialization or the more commercial side is what is can be looked at and can be reviewed.
Who do you blame for the over-commercialization and this commercialization coming at the expense of losing so many of these historical sites? For example, the Prophet's wife's Khadija's home, Abu Bakr's home, other very valuable historical sites and artifacts being bulldozed along the way to make way for this expansion and commercialization. Who do you blame?
Well, it's a matter not of blaming, especially you cannot point a finger. It's a situation, I think that's what it needs to be reviewed. I'm not interested in blaming particular, but it is the whole mood in the Muslim world and in every country, throwing what we had before, history and everything behind us, and looking toward what is so-called progress or development and advancement. And I think that's where it is the problem of how we're doing things, and not and why and for whom, but who's doing it is really is a multi-sided aspect.
Dr. Al-Alawi in London, does Mecca need the Hilton Hotel, the Clock Tower, Zamzam Mall with Starbucks and with Mac and Tiffany and all these Western clothing outlets? Does Mecca need all of this, or do you find that this is perhaps a great scar on the face of a holy site?
I think really Mecca does not need this. Mecca is changing daily, as respected Dr. Sami Angawi has said, and I think we have to realize that Mecca is not any ordinary city. It is not New York, it is not Paris, it's not London. It is where Baytullah, or the Kaaba of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stands, where all the Muslims face to pray. And of course, it has to be respected as a holy sanctuary, where we have these ugly marble castles springing up around the Masjid al-Haram. It seems that we are going towards a very ugly architecture with no intricate design, and this actually seems like we are living in Las Vegas. I mean, if you go to Las Vegas, you will see these streaming lights, you will see laser lights, much worse than in Manhattan. And we are concerned about Al-Aqsa, which is, of course, controlled by the Zionists. But what about the holy cities which are controlled by the Muslims? and yet the Muslims fail to ignore the fact that the heritage has to be preserved. Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, during his period and after that, he never said or stated, or even his companions, that we should go and demolish the pharaonic pyramids and so forth, even the Bayman idols. Now, we have to take this very seriously. If this is going to continue, then we will not have anything left to tell our children and our great-grandchildren. It will become a legend. Therefore, I am very concerned about this, that the Muslims should react to this. I'm not against the expansion of Masjid al-Haram. Of course, we need expansion. There has to be a strategy. There has to be serious thinking. There have to be experts involved in with this. People like Dr. Sami Angawi and other professionals who know the cities, who know how to react to these ugly developments that we are seeing. You know, the issue here that we are dealing is that we have lost the four mountains which are mentioned in the Quran as the stakes to stabilize this mizan of this balance of this universe.
Okay, I want to bring in Arsalan Iftikhar. Fair point there and well put. Arsalan, what Irfan Al-Alawi talks as these ugly developments, looking at it, you know, from an outsider's perspective, particularly somebody who's writing about Islam and the different perceptions both in the West and in the Muslim world, you seem to have two extremes, two polar opposites here. On the one hand, you have a very austere Wahhabi Salafi interpretation of Islam in Saudi Arabia, which in a way gives the theological backing to bulldoze some of these things away. And on the other hand, you have aspects of the West which are like on steroids. You have lots of bling, for want of a better word. How do you reconcile the two, and how do those contradictions play out in your eyes?
Well, I mean, I think what's really interesting to note here is that this expansion in Makkah that we're seeing right now has been going on for almost over a decade now. And, you know, when you first went to Mecca and you saw the first Kentucky Fried Chicken there, or, you know, the first pizza restaurant, that really didn't bring people to issue any call for concern. But now what we're seeing, you know, with the Royal Mecca Clock Tower, which towers at 800 feet, you know, over the Haram Sharif, you know, the fact that they're building essentially these 5- or 6-star hotels now, which essentially cater only to the most opulent. What I fail to understand is how these expansions are going to affect the average Haji, the average person going on Hajj, many of who've you know, saved money all their entire life just to make the trip there, who could never afford, you know, $2,000 a night for a hotel, or, you know, to afford a few $1,000s for that skybox view. It looked like we were watching the Super Bowl or the World Cup from a penthouse luxury suite. And so what's really interesting to note is the vast majority of these 2, 3, 4, 5 million people who go to Hajj every year are not like you and I. They save up their entire life, and I don't see any accommodations for them. I see it only for the most opulent.
Actually, on that point, I have a question for Dr. Angawi, if you could answer this. We have a lot of people who are tweeting about the economics of what this construction means. One here says the Saudi government is exploiting the pilgrimage by charging so much with these new developments and killing the chance that people will be able to go to Mecca. Another says that Mecca is the only place on earth where everyone is equal, but by building these royal towers, we're also building class differentiation. So I wondered, what's your take on that?
Well, again, you have to differentiate. The Saudi government is spending many times the amount of money coming in from the Hajj to try to do the right projects and to try to do the accommodation and try to do the health aspect and the transportation and so on. But you have on another side the developers who are trying to make use of this goodwill of the government, and then many times I agree with many people who are pointing that attention, and I did actually 30 years ago, that the direction of the development is not going in the right direction. And but again, we have to separate between the policies or the goodwill of the king himself. He wants to see the best happening in Mecca. The governor of Mecca has also is a man of culture, is a poet, is an artist, and he's head of the Thinking Arab League or something like that. And he has put forward many good points that he wants to see. He said even at one point, if you have to plan from the zero, to go back to the zero level. So I want to not now say the government and the government. No, let's look at the situation. Is the situation as planners and architect or the direction for every Muslim wanting to see in Mecca, is it going in the right direction or not? So we can actually then see how we can correct that direction.
That's a very good point, Dr. Angawi. It's a very good point. However, whatever sites have been lost, you can't bring them back, of course. And I was reading one of the interviews conducted with you not too long ago. You had said that between 400 and 500 sites of great religious and historical significance have been lost. I've noticed myself, if somebody took me around Mecca, even Medina, usually the tour guide would say, this used to be the place where, this was Abu Bakr's house, for example, or Khadija's house. Or they would say, this was the place where the companions did X, Y, Z. But when you look at it, it's a parking lot, or it's a building, or it's a public toilet. So those sites have been lost forever. And for many, 1400 years of history and culture has been bulldozed. Do you feel that there are enough sites still available to restore, to preserve, so that there's still something left of your heritage and culture?
It's our heritage and culture. It's not mine. It's a Muslim heritage and culture, taken care of by the Saudi government. Yes, they are the custodian. Yes, but we really we need more people with good mind and good analytical aspect to look around and see and advise, because there is only one voice heard, and the louder voice, which is the voice of the religious institutions, which are not, in the beginning they were even wanting to get rid of everything, but now there is more rules and more regulation coming out of the government, saying restriction to destruction of old building and historical. So I'm not as worried about the historical site. There is maybe 5 or more left in Mecca, and maybe 10 or 15 left out of hundreds. But now the past is almost over. Right. It's finished almost. But now we have to stop and say what is coming. Okay. The future of Mecca and Medina, how we can maybe maximize the cultural issues, how can we maximize the environmental importance of the mountains. Now it's not only buildings, now the mountains are being removed in Mecca. And because of developer and contractor who only used to have flat lands and used to use bulldozers. We have to get the bulldozers out of Mecca. Stop. Right. This is the main important issue now. We should ask to stop and take the bulldozer, and no more dynamite in Mecca. Okay. There are many ways to plan. There are many ways to design. And I can guarantee you, as a specialist, as a hajjiologist, even I could say, that there are ways to even use part of the mountains without destruction. Okay. We have to concentrate. I want to get a response stopping the destruction. Okay. I want to get a response from Irfan Al-Alawi. Fair point there, and well put. Irfan Al-Alawi, are you as optimistic as Dr. Angawi that those in charge, the king, the governor, and others, have the best intentions to try to preserve what's there?
Well, I think, like Dr. Angawi has said, that it is a very crucial stage that we are at, and it belongs to the whole of the Muslim world. With all due respect with King Abdullah, I mean, he has implemented the expansion of Masjid al-Haram, but I'm still very concerned about the people who advise him, the hardcore Wahabies who are still insisting that certain holy sites or historical sites should not remain, i.e. the library in Makkah al-Mukarramah, Makkah al-Mukarramah. This is the house of Mawlid Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he was born. This is opposite where the house of Bayt al-Khatija was. Now, we are at the stage that if they are demolishing everything, this one of the sites is under threat. I'm really worried at this stage that, okay, expansion is good, King Abdullah is doing some good work, but he has ill advisors. The mayor of Mecca, he should know better. His father was a great imam of Mecca. But again, I think these people are seeing money and anything which will accumulate money from the pilgrims, extortionate rates.
Okay.
Extortionate rates is an issue that most of the countries deal with at the peak season in Christmas and other. My major concern is that we have to protect anything which is remaining in Mecca, like Dr. Angawi said, if it's 4 or 5, the Masjid of Sayyidina Hamza or Mawlid Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is the point of the Muslims crying tomorrow if they demolish the location where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born?
Excellent point.
This gives
Excellent point.
a tool to the
Irfan,
non-Muslims to attack us.
Okay, Irfan, I want to bring in Arsalan here. Arsalan?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important for people to remember, especially for your viewers, is, the magnitude of what the Turkish foreign minister has called, quote, cultural genocide. For example, an ancient house belonging to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was raised to, as you mentioned, build up a public toilet facility. An ancient masjid belonging to Abu Bakr, the first Khalifa of Islam, has now been replaced by an ATM machine. And so, we have to ask ourselves, is the price worth it? Would we rather have Abu Bakr's masjid, his mosque, or would we rather have an ATM machine? There are plenty of ATM machines. And what's really interesting to note is that the Saudi government talks about expansion and the growing numbers of people attending the Hajj. But what's interesting to note is they're the ones who actually cap the number of visas given to Hajjis every year, so they can limit the number of people who are coming to Hajj every year. So it seems to me that they're having their cake and eating it too by using the excuse of growing numbers when they have full control over it, but yet again, doing this cultural genocide by knocking off, historical preservation sites that are important to Muslims all around the world.
Well, on that note, we have a lot of people who, like you, are saying that we understand that there is a need for expansion. We have a tweet here from Free Agaden who says, there's certainly a need for expansion. However, building oversized shopping malls on Islam's holiest site cannot be justified. And I want to pose a question to Dr. Angawi. There's a tweet from someone saying the Prophet Muhammad once said that people will race to build tall buildings. Isn't that happening right now?
Yes, you see, again, if we go back to the Prophet, and from the other side, we have to speak about the growing number of pilgrims. And wish that everybody is saying there is now 1.so billion Muslims and they have to take 10%, you're talking about 50 million. But the Hajj is the only part of the Islam, the main pillars of Islam, that is saying if you are able to do it. So it is an indication there that is only could be a limited number. We should really think of numbers. But again, in the other side, these expansions, not of the mosque, those towers are only accommodating 30s, 50s. You're talking about tens of thousands. You're not talking about millions. And if you build so many of those, you will maybe maximum in the central area will have maybe 500,000 at most. So I really need to adjust in the policies. No more high-rise building, and the Kaaba should be our reference and our scale. As the Prophet said, as all the history from the beginning of Abraham until just 50 years ago, the highest thing in perspective view was the Kaaba. Now, if you compare the Kaaba with this clock tower, the Kaaba is nothing. The Kaaba is almost nil. So we have more and more coming. But if we see what the Prophet ﷺ did, he performed his pilgrimage outside.
Good point, Dr. Angawi. Dr. Angawi, hold that thought because I have to wrap up here. We'll continue the discussion for a few minutes in the post-show. But thanks very much for joining us, Sami Angawi and Irfan Al-Alawi, Arsalan Iftikhar. Thanks for joining us on the Orange Couch. Malika, see you Monday. Thanks for joining us. Stream.aljazeera.com for continuation. Welcome back to the Post Show. We're talking Saudi Arabia, expansion, the wealthy expansion, and the commercialization, and whether some of the heritage of Saudi has been destroyed over the years. Let me bring this picture to your attention. It's from a photo essay from the 1950s. A National Geographic photographer had actually performed the Hajj, and these were some of the pictures taking place. Now, when you look at this, it seems as if it was centuries ago. This is inside the Grand Mosque, inside the Haram, the Kaaba on the right-hand side. And you can see, you know, there seems to be a lot of charm and character regarding Saudi Arabia there. Let me just show you one of the others. This is from Arafat, which is one of what many consider the culmination of the Hajj, one of the holiest sites in Islam. You see the tent city beneath them over there. And let me see if I can find just one more. Here you have the Kaaba as well from that National Geographic photo essay. You see no high-rise buildings, no five-star hotels, no shopping malls, and no clock towers. Dr. Angawi, I know you can't see those pictures right now because you're looking straight down the barrel of the camera, but you're old enough to remember a time that was different, aren't you? Do you feel that some of that character and charm and magic of Mecca and, dare I say, spirituality has disappeared with all of this commercialization and this construction?
Oh yes, yes, definitely. I mean, I've been, you know, not now, I've been since 40 years with the Hajj Center starting, warning about this. I even made some images through the computer saying, this is a possible images, and the people thought I was exaggerating. Now I found out that I was not. I was actually exaggerating and not showing how worse it could get. Now the mountains, I'm telling everybody, you have to wake up. It's not anymore the building. The building, let's cry, oh, let's not cry only for what went. We have to protect what is left. What is went, yes, was spiritual, was nice, was the character built over 1,400 years. Even the heritage under the ground, which shows Mecca is ancient, is gone. Everything is being affected. But now there has to be a voice of the Muslim world advising, and I repeat that word, advising, because it is Saudi territory, it's a Saudi country, but we have to really carefully not to turn it into a political movement and make it into the right advice to say, please stop and let's review. You do not have to remove the creation of God. The creation of God is the mountains. Mecca's character is mountain, is a valley with no trees. So that basic character as a sanctuary, which you cannot cut the thorn shrubs or trees or plants, and you cannot hunt, is now turning into, I don't know what, megalopolus or something. Is out of proportion, out of identity, and a combination of, I don't know, Vegas or Manhattan, and a little bit of Lebanon, a little bit of this. And the biggest problem really we have to emphasize is the contractor who've been doing this for the last 50 years. This contractor has to be stopped. And this contractor was the reason for the many problems in the world, the same name. And we have to emphasize that we don't need the contractor to come at the beginning. Contractors should come at the end. And planners and architects should take over from the 0 point, and then the contractor will come. But you have the contractor and the developer and making beautiful images and convincing the royal, saying, look, we're going to solve your problem. All they're interested in making more money. So this really is important that we stand by
Dr.
the
Angawi, if I could
governmental
just interrupt you on that point, I'd actually like to pose a question to Irfan. We're talking about 1,400 years ago, but 1,400 years ago, Mecca was also a hub, a busy hub, a trading center, even in the Prophet's time. And we have a tweet here from Junaid Adwar who says, Mecca has always been profiting from religion, from the pilgrimage, and it's been a historic world trade center. So how is this different?
Well, of course, during the time of the prophetic era, there was changes made during the time of the Caliphate and the Prophet's time. Look, what we have to realize here, again, it's a dilemma that the Muslim Ummah is facing. We are trying to go, or we have already gone against the teachings of our Prophet, peace be upon him. You know, he said, which you mentioned earlier on, that, you know, the Arab Bedouins will compete against either to build these ugly tall towers and buildings. Now, does it mean that these words of the Prophet don't have any significance of the hadith the Prophet has warned us about? Or is it just that the Wahhabis just deliberately like going against everything what the Prophet says, and everything that we praise the Prophet is bid'ah and shirk? But there, of course, to have the clock tower showing some laser show, those people who cannot hear the adhan and so forth, this is not bid'ah and this is not shirk. But for those people to be able to go to the Jabal al-Thawr or Jabal al-Harra to do their nawafila or their ibadah, following the footsteps of the Prophet or the companions, this leads to bid'ah. I think that's what we have to realize at this stage. Muslims, we have some terrorists, and I think the terrorists are Wahhabis, those who are not loyal to their Prophet and their own Islamic heritage, or the Islamic heritage which belongs to the whole Ummah. I call them terrorists because, you know, if you don't have the respect for the Prophet and his relics, then I think we don't have these people to be as moderate Muslims. And I give you an example here. When the Pharaoh was crossing the river Nile and he had his chariot, you know, they have even the wheels of the chariot preserved in Cairo. You know, these are things that we have learned by history. And here the Muslims are demolishing and removing everything which belongs to the Prophet, let alone the Kaaba. They are you know, going to they have implemented in their fatwas and so forth. They want to demolish the Green Dome,
Right.
remove his grave and so forth.
Right. Yes, of course, that news regarding Medina, some sheikhs, some clerics in Saudi Arabia want to get rid of certain prophetic relics as well, the Green Dome at the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. Some even going so far as to say that the actual gravesite needs to be flattened. But that's all the time we have for this discussion. Sami Angawi, Irfan Alawi, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion. We hope to speak to you again in the not too distant future. And thanks for your contribution to this conversation.
The subject is so big that needs to be visited again.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. So much to say,
So
so little time as always, and it's testimony to a good and engaging discussion, Sami Angawi and Irfan Alawi. Arsalan, before Malika takes us into some of the other stories that we're following, some final thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know, one of my Facebook friends, Larry Anthony, who is a convert to Islam, and I think, you know, for those of us who have been lucky enough to go on Hajj or Umrah to Mecca, I think it's important to keep in mind those people who have not been able to go. And he commented on my Facebook page that this endless construction is really the ultimate destruction of Islam's legacy. And being a convert to Islam, these sites give me more validity to my faith. But by the time I make Hajj or Umrah in Mecca, they will be gone.
Right.
And so, you know, the things that people have gotten to see and actually, you know, soak in for 1,400 years won't be there for our kids and their future generations.
To be fair, both Malika and I, when we were covering Hajj together, we used to have breakfast at Starbucks every morning at the shopping
I used to have Kentucky Fried Chicken, but that was the extent of the opulence back then.
So I'm feeling guilty for that now. Malika, let's have a complete change of beat here, change of direction. Give us some insight into some of the other stories we're touching upon.
Okay, well, we're reaching out to our community on Reddit, which is the social aggregating website, and we posted a few stories, and we want our viewers, we want your input on them. So one of the things that we are focusing on is a story that's in Wired, Get Hack, Don't Tell. And basically it's a story of how some U.S. officials at an airbase in the state of Nevada knew about a virus affecting drones, the drones that fly over Afghanistan, Pakistan. This virus was known about 2 weeks. They didn't tell U.S. Air Force officials about it, and U.S. Air Force officials found out about it by reading Wired. So,
well, the drones killed so many civilians, quote unquote, unintentionally. Perhaps they should start blaming the viruses for those mistakes. Next story.
What could happen next? The next story we're following is Amnesty International, the human rights organization, is seeking the arrest of former U.S. President George W. Bush. And they say, as a story here that I'll blow up on my screen, what they say is that he's about to go to Canada next week for an economic summit. And they say that he should be arrested for crimes and responsibility for torture and other such crimes.
Let's get Arsalan's take on that. George W. Bush has written a book now, Decision Points. And, he's sort of after year and a half to 2 years in the wilderness. He's coming out again. He's speaking. He's talking about his time. As a lawyer, what do you make of this? What's the likelihood of George W. Bush ever going to The Hague?
A grand total of 0. You know, we've seen this time and time again when international leaders, Tony Blair, former American Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, traveling abroad to, you know, be threatened with indictments issued. The problem is that since under international law, since most of the actions that occurred by Bush and all these leaders were done during their official capacities as government officials, there's a doctrine called sovereign immunity, which basically means that as a head of state, for example, you cannot be tried for crimes that you purportedly commit whilst in office. And so it's one of those things that is, you know, it's more for publicity than anything else, and to, you know, keep, you know, those issues within the zeitgeist. But other than that, I think that they have
symbolic rather than
it is. Oh, it's absolutely symbolic.
Because some of the fiercest critics say, yeah, if it's not a Balkan leader or a Central African leader, there's, you know, 0 likelihood of anybody going to The Hague. Malika, final story that we're keeping
the last thing that we're covering is Thai floods. There's been devastating floods in Thailand. About 280 people have been killed in the past 2 months. But there is now an effort on social media to track the floods, to track the damage. As you see here, there is a mapping project, globalfloodmap.org, and that's on my screen. And it's basically tracking where the floods are, where the most damage is, and where the most destruction is. So it's a pretty cool project.
For the people of Thailand so far. Good to see people taking the initiative online, raising awareness and informing people in general as well. Okay, so we hope you're following those stories as we are. We've got a packed week ahead from Monday. Of course, we don't have a show on Friday, but you can watch repeats of this on stream.aljazeera.com. Arsalan, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Malika, see you next week.
See you next week.
And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now.